The rain followed me into Red Hollow like it had a personal grudge. It came down in cold silver ropes, turning the main street into a river of mud and horse dung, washing the dust off the false front buildings but doing nothing to clean the rot underneath. I rode in slow, with my hat pulled low and my old cavalry coat soaked black across the shoulders. My horse, Gideon, was limping just enough to remind me we had both been alive longer than we deserved. The town looked tired. Not sleepy. Not peaceful. Tired. There is a difference. A sleepy town keeps smoke rising from chimneys, women laughing behind curtains, children chasing dogs under porch roofs. A tired town watches you from behind cracked shutters. It keeps its doors half open and its voices low. It has learned that noise attracts trouble, and trouble usually comes wearing spurs. Red Hollow had that look. A faded sign swung above the livery stable. The general store had one broken window patched with flour sacks. Across the street, a man in a brown coat stood under an awning, smoking a cigarette that had gone wet between his fingers. He watched me ride in, but when my eyes shifted toward him, he looked down. That told me more than a welcome ever could. Folks in Red Hollow had learned not to stare too long. I guided Gideon toward the livery. The stable boy was no boy at all, maybe 30, with a narrow face and nervous hands. He stepped out when I dismounted, glancing first at me, then at the revolver on my hip, then somewhere over my shoulder as if checking whether someone else had followed me in. "Need him rubbed down," I said. "Feed too, if you've got oats." He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir." That made him pause. I reached into my coat and handed him a coin. "Just take care of the horse." He looked at the coin like he expected it to bite him. "You passing through?" he asked. That was the idea. He swallowed. Best idea. I looked at him then, really looked. Rain dripped from the edge of my hat. "That right?" He gave the street a quick glance. "Red Hollow ain't a place men come to stay anymore." "Why's that?" His mouth tightened. For a second, I thought he might answer. Then the saloon doors down the street burst open and laughter spilled out, hard, drunken, ugly laughter. The stableman's face closed like a jail door. "Ask around," he muttered. "Or better yet, don't." I left Gideon with him and crossed the street toward the saloon. My boots sank deep in the mud with every step, pulling at me like the earth wanted to keep me there. Above the batwing doors, a painted sign read, "The Red Lantern." The lantern hanging beside it had no red glass left. Just a naked flame trembling against the rain. I stepped inside. Warmth hit first. Then smoke. Then whiskey, sweat, wet wool, cheap perfume, and fear. Fear has a smell if you have lived close enough to it. Most men think it smells like blood. It does not. Blood comes later. Fear smells like sour breath, stale sweat, and people pretending not to listen. The Red Lantern was full enough for a storm night. Miners near the back. 2 cattlemen at a corner table. A tired piano player tapping out something cheerful with the enthusiasm of a condemned man. Behind the bar stood a woman with auburn hair pinned up messily, sleeves rolled to her elbows, eyes sharp enough to cut rope. She looked at me only once. That was all she needed. "Coffee?" she asked. That made me almost smile. "Do I look that bad?" "You look like whiskey would finish what the rain started." "Coffee, then." I sat at the far end of the bar, back to the wall. Old habit. The kind you never lose. The woman poured coffee into a chipped cup and slid it over. 2 cents. I gave her 5. She looked at the extra coin, then back at me. "Room upstairs is 50 cents. I didn't ask for one." "You will." There was something in her voice. Not kindness exactly. Warning dressed as business. "What's your name?" I asked. "Martha Bell." She wiped the counter with a rag. "And yours?" I wrapped both hands around the cup. The heat felt good against my fingers. "Don't have one worth using." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment. That so? That's so. Before she could say anything else, a chair crashed behind me. The piano stopped. I did not turn right away. You learn things by listening first. A man laughed. Big lungs. Drunk confidence. The kind of laugh that usually belonged to someone who had never paid for the pain he caused. I said, "Sing it again," he barked. A smaller voice answered, "I don't know the song, Mr. Vale." Then came the sound of glass breaking. I turned my head just enough. 3 men stood near the piano. All wore dusters too clean for working men and gun belts too expensive for honest ones. The biggest of them had a black beard, a red scarf, and a face built for cruelty. He had one hand wrapped around the collar of the piano player, an older man with shaking fingers. Martha went still behind the bar. The big man shoved the piano player backward. "You calling me a liar?" "No, sir. I just..." The backhand came fast. The old man hit the floor. Nobody moved. That was what I noticed most. Not the violence. I had seen violence in every shape God and men could invent. What caught my attention was the silence after it. The way every person in that saloon became smaller. The way eyes dropped to tables. The way men with guns suddenly found their drinks interesting. The big man, Vale, enjoyed that silence. Men like him always do. He turned slowly, grinning. "Ain't no music in this place anymore, Martha." Martha's jaw tightened. "You've had enough, Cole." So his name was Cole Vale. I filed it away. Cole leaned on the piano, hand resting near his revolver. "You telling me what I've had?" "I'm telling you not to break my piano player." His grin widened. "Your piano player owes money. He owes Tucker money. Not you." At the name Tucker, the room seemed to breathe even less. Cole stepped toward the bar. "Tucker owns the debt. I collect it. That means I own the old man's hands until he pays." The piano player tried to get up. One of Cole's men kicked him in the ribs and knocked him back down. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. Not much. Just enough. Martha saw it. Her eyes flicked to my hand, then to my face. Almost like she was begging me not to do whatever she thought I might do. I took a slow drink of coffee. It tasted burnt. Cole grabbed the old man by the wrist and dragged him upright. "Can't pay with money, maybe he pays with fingers." That got a sound from the room. A woman gasped. Someone whispered, "Lord." Cole pulled a knife from his belt. I set my cup down. The sound was small. But in a room that scared, even small sounds carry. Cole looked over. So did everyone else. I did not stand. I did not reach for my gun. I just looked at him from beneath the brim of my hat. "Let him go," I said. The words felt heavy coming out of my mouth. Not loud. Not angry. Just tired. Cole stared at me, surprised at first. Then amused. "Well now." He let the old man sag but kept hold of his wrist. "Who might you be?" "Nobody." The grin came back. "Nobody?" "That's right." One of his men laughed. "Nobody ought to mind his business." I looked at him. He stopped laughing. Cole noticed that too. He angled his body toward me. "You new in town, nobody?" "Passing through." "Then pass." That was my plan. He lifted the knife slightly. "Good. Keep planning." The old piano player's eyes met mine. Pale eyes. Wet with pain. But there was something else in them too. Shame. I hated that most of all. Pain can be endured. Shame digs deeper. I stood. The scrape of my chair against the floor sounded like thunder. Cole's men shifted. Hands dropped closer to guns. Martha whispered something under her breath. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a curse. I walked toward Cole slowly, keeping my hands open at my sides. That confused them. Most gunmen expect another man to posture, to spit threats, to reach. I did none of that. Cole pushed the old man aside and turned fully toward me. You trying to die in a town where nobody knows your name? I stopped 2 steps away. No. Then what are you trying to do? Finish my coffee. For a heartbeat, nobody understood. Then Cole's face darkened. He swung the knife. Not at my belly. At my throat. Fast enough to kill most men. But most men had not spent years learning how to stay alive when the world narrowed to inches. I caught his wrist with my left hand, stepped inside the swing, and drove my right elbow into the soft place under his ribs. The breath left him in a hard grunt. Before his men could draw, I twisted his wrist until the knife dropped. I caught it by the handle before it hit the floor. Then I placed the blade flat against Cole's own cheek. Not cutting. Just promising. The room froze. Cole's eyes bulged. He tried to breathe but could not find the air. His men had their hands on their guns now. Mine stayed nowhere near mine. Tell them, I said softly. Cole swallowed. I pressed the knife a little closer. He rasped, don't. The men stopped. I leaned nearer to him. The old man keeps his fingers. Martha keeps her piano. You walk out in the rain and tell whoever sent you that Red Hollow looked peaceful tonight. Cole's face had gone red. Rage and humiliation fought inside him. Rage wanted blood. Humiliation knew blood might be his. You don't know who you're crossing, he whispered. I looked into his eyes. For a moment, I was not in Red Hollow anymore. I was back under a burning sky with cannon smoke in my lungs, hearing horses scream and men call for mothers who would never hear them. I saw faces I had buried. Names I had tried to forget. I felt the old cold thing inside me stir awake. No, I said. You don't. I released him. Cole stumbled backward, clutching his wrist. His men helped him toward the door, though one of them kept staring at me like he wanted to memorize my face for a grave marker. At the doors, Cole turned. This ain't finished. It never is, I said. He spat on the floor and shoved his way out into the rain. Only after the doors stopped swinging did the room begin breathing again. The piano player sat on the floor, holding his ribs. Martha hurried around the bar to help him. Men looked at me now, not with gratitude exactly, but with fear of a different sort. Hope and fear often wear the same face in towns like Red Hollow. I returned to my seat. My coffee had gone cold. Martha came back after a minute. Her hands were steady, but her voice was not. You shouldn't have done that. I know. Cole Vale works for Silas Tucker. I figured. You don't understand. Tucker owns half this town and scares the other half. And Cole is just a dog on his chain. I picked up my cup, then set it down again. Every chain has 2 ends. Martha stared at me. Behind us, the old piano player whispered, Who are you? The whole saloon seemed to lean closer. I looked down at my hands. Old hands. Scarred hands. Hands that had held rifles, sabers, shovels, and dying boys. Hands that had done things no church bell could forgive. Nobody, I said again. But this time, no one believed me. Outside, thunder rolled over Red Hollow. And somewhere beyond the rain, I had the feeling a man faster than any rumor was already riding toward town. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, but Red Hollow still looked drowned. Mud covered the streets in thick brown waves, wagon wheels carved deep trenches through the center of town, and the smell of wetwood hung heavy in the morning air. I sat on the porch outside the Red Lantern Saloon with a tin cup of black coffee warming my hands while the town slowly woke around me. Or tried to. Nobody in Red Hollow truly rested anymore. Not after men like Cole Vale started walking the streets. The sky was pale gray when Martha stepped outside carrying a broom and a bucket of dirty water. Her auburn hair was tied back tighter than the night before, but the exhaustion under her eyes remained. She stopped when she saw me sitting there. "You're still alive," she said. Disappointing? Surprising. She leaned the broom beside the door and crossed her arms. "Cole usually comes back with friends. He probably still will. That doesn't concern you?" I took a sip of coffee. "Everything concerns me. Doesn't mean I worry about it." She studied me carefully, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Men who talk like that usually end up buried. Eventually. That almost made her smile. Almost. The town sheriff appeared at the far end of the street just then. He moved slowly, shoulders bent forward under the weight of years and whiskey. His badge looked dull against his dusty coat. He noticed me immediately. And he did not look happy about it. Sheriff Amos Doyle climbed the saloon steps and stopped in front of me. His face was rough and red around the nose, with tired eyes that had seen too much and stopped fighting it years ago. "You the stranger from last night?" he asked. "I suppose. You got a name?" "Not using one. That makes things difficult." "For who?" "For me." He glanced toward Martha. "You saw what happened?" "I saw Cole Vale start trouble," she answered. Doyle rubbed his jaw. "And I heard the stranger nearly broke Cole's wrist." "Didn't nearly," I said quietly. "Could've." "Didn't." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He looked at my hands then. Men notice hands when they've lived around violence long enough. Mine carried old scars. White lines across the knuckles. Burn marks near the thumb. A stiff left finger that never bent properly anymore. Not the hands of a drifter. Not the hands of a farmer either. "You military?" he asked suddenly. I looked out at the muddy street instead of answering. That was answer enough. Doyle sighed heavily. "Listen carefully. Red Hollow's got enough problems without wandering gunmen making things worse." "I'm not a gunman." Martha snorted softly behind him. The sheriff ignored it. "Cole works for Silas Tucker. Tucker controls the freight routes, cattle shipments, gambling, and half the ranches around here. Men disappear for crossing him. Then maybe folks should stop crossing him." The sheriff's expression hardened. "That's not funny." I wasn't joking. Silence settled between us. Finally Doyle adjusted his hat. "You planning to stay long?" "No." "Good." He walked back down the steps, boots sinking into the mud. But halfway across the street he stopped and looked back toward me. "You fought like cavalry," he said. Then he kept walking. Martha watched him disappear around the corner before speaking again. "You were cavalry?" "Long time ago." "Union?" I nodded once. "War still follows you?" I stared into my coffee for a moment. "War follows everybody," I said. By midday, the town had already started whispering. I heard it while walking past the barber shop. "That's him. The stranger. He took Cole Vale apart without drawing. Maybe he's one of Tucker's men." "No. Tucker's men don't look scared afterward." I kept walking. Small towns survive on gossip because gossip feels safer than truth. Truth gets people killed. I found work that afternoon behind the church helping an old rancher repair broken fencing. The rancher's name was Elias Turner, a gray-bearded widower with sun-damaged skin and a permanent limp in his right leg. He watched me hammer boards into place for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. "You hold nails like a soldier." I kept working. Didn't know there was a military way to hold nails. There's a military way to do everything. That was true enough. Elias spat tobacco into the dirt. "You fought at Brimstone Ridge?" The hammer stopped in my hand for half a second. "Too long." His eyes sharpened immediately. "I knew it," he muttered. I drove another nail into the wood harder than necessary. "A lot of men fought there. Not many survived." I looked at him slowly. "You did." "Lost my son there." The words settled heavy between us. I nodded once. Sorry for that. Elias studied me carefully now, not with suspicion but with something deeper. Recognition. You ever notice, he said quietly, how soldiers can always find each other? Even years later? Yes. You got the look. What look? The one men get after they've buried too many friends. The hammer rested against my thigh. Wind rolled across the plains outside town, carrying the dry smell of grass and distant rain. Elias leaned against the fence post. You know what people are saying about you? I try not to. They say maybe Red Hollow finally found somebody meaner than Tucker. That would be unfortunate. Why? Because men like that usually die ugly. The old rancher chuckled softly. You already talk like a dead man. I almost answered. But then hoofbeats thundered through town. Fast. Urgent. Both of us turned toward the main road. A rider burst into Red Hollow covered in dust, horse foaming at the mouth. He nearly fell from the saddle trying to stop outside the general store. Folks rushed onto porches and sidewalks immediately. Fear spreads quicker than fire in places like that. The rider shouted before he even dismounted. He's coming. Nobody asked who. Nobody needed to. The name moved through town like cold wind. The fastest gun. He's coming here. Dear God. I watched faces pale all around me. Even Elias Turner looked uneasy now. The rider stumbled toward the water barrel, breathing hard. 3 days behind me. Maybe less. Him and 4 riders. Who? Someone finally asked, though his voice already knew the answer. The rider swallowed hard. Luke Grayson. Silence. Pure silence. I had heard the name before. Everybody had. Luke Grayson. The fastest gun in the West. Some called him a legend. Others called him a butcher with expensive revolvers. Stories followed him across territories like vultures. Men claimed he once killed 3 brothers before they cleared leather. Claimed he shot a sheriff through a swinging saloon door from 30 feet away. Stories grow larger with distance. But fear usually means there's truth hiding underneath. The rider pointed toward the sheriff's office. He's looking for someone. Sheriff Doyle emerged from his office looking irritated until he heard the name. Then he looked old. What's Grayson want in Red Hollow? He asked. The rider wiped sweat from his face. He didn't say. But he's been asking questions about a stranger. My stomach tightened slightly. Not fear. Recognition. The kind old instincts feel before trouble arrives. Sheriff Doyle's eyes slowly moved through the crowd until they landed on me near the church fence. The whole town followed his gaze. Damn fools. Elias muttered under his breath. Well, now things get interesting. I handed him the hammer. I should leave town. Maybe, Elias said. Question is whether town will let you. That evening the Red Lantern felt different. Quieter. Men drank slower. Conversations stayed low. Every time the saloon doors opened, heads turned sharply toward them. I sat alone near the back wall eating stew that tasted mostly of salt and old potatoes. Martha approached carrying another coffee pot. You hear the news? She asked. Hard not to. She poured carefully. Luke Grayson's killed at least 19 men in duels. Probably more. You know him? I looked up at her. No. But I know his kind. What kind is that? The kind that enjoys being feared. Martha leaned against the table slightly. And what kind are you? That question lingered between us longer than either of us expected. Finally I answered quietly. The kind trying very hard not to become something again. Her expression softened a little. Before she could reply, the piano player from the night before approached my table carefully, ribs wrapped tight beneath his shirt. His name, I learned, was Walter Green. He removed his hat awkwardly. Wanted to thank you. You already did. No, he said. I didn't. He placed something on the table. A faded silver military pin. Cavalry insignia. I stared at it. You dropped it last night, Walter said. Figured you'd want it back. I picked it up slowly. My thumb brushed across the worn engraving. For a second, the saloon disappeared. I smelled gunpowder again. Smoke. Burning horses. Men screaming in the dark. And another voice. Captain. We're surrounded. The memory hit so hard my chest tightened. Martha noticed immediately. You all right? I closed my fist around the insignia. Fine. But my voice sounded distant even to me. Walter hesitated. You served under Colonel Barrett? I looked at him sharply. How do you know that name? Because my brother did. Something dangerous moved quietly through my thoughts then. Old names. Old ghosts. Old graves. Walter lowered his voice. He used to tell stories about one officer. Said the man saved nearly 40 soldiers during the Ridge Massacre. I stared at him without blinking. Walter swallowed nervously. He said the officer disappeared after the war. Folks thought he died. Martha looked between us now, confused. What officer? Walter's eyes stayed fixed on me. The ghost of Brimstone Ridge. The room suddenly felt much colder. I stood slowly from the table. Too slowly. Because men nearby had started listening. And once stories begin in towns like Red Hollow, they spread fast. I grabbed my coat. I need air. Martha stepped after me as I headed for the doors. Wait. But I was already outside. Night had swallowed the town. The wind carried dust across the empty streets, and somewhere far beyond the darkness, coyotes cried into the plains. I stood there alone beneath the swinging lantern light, breathing slowly. Trying to bury the memories again. Trying to stay nobody. Then I heard hoofbeats in the distance. Not one horse. Several. Coming closer through the night. The hoofbeats faded before they reached town. That was the worst part. If riders come straight in, you know what they want. You can count them, measure them, watch their hands, see how their horses breathe. Trouble in the open is still trouble, but at least it has a shape. Trouble that circles in the dark is another thing entirely. I stood outside the red lantern with one hand resting near my belt, not on my revolver, just close enough to remind myself it was there. The wind moved through Red Hollow in dry whispers, pushing dust across the planks and rattling the loose sign above the general store. Behind me, Martha stepped onto the porch. You hear it too? She asked. Yes. Grayson? Maybe. She looked toward the black edge of town, where the road disappeared into the plains. But they didn't come in. No. Why? I watched the darkness. Because they wanted us to know they could. Martha said nothing after that. A town can feel fear the way a horse feels weather. Red Hollow had felt those hoofbeats too. Curtains shifted in windows. Lamps went out one by one. Somewhere, a baby started crying and was quickly hushed. I had known towns like that during the war. Villages waiting for raiders. Camps waiting for cannon fire. Men waiting for dawn because dawn meant either survival or graves. Martha folded her arms against the chill. Walter shouldn't have said what he said. No. But was it true? I did not answer. She turned to face me. Were you really that man? I looked down at the muddy street, now drying into cracked ridges beneath the moonlight. I was a lot of men once. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then the sheriff's office door opened across the street. Amos Doyle stepped out holding a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. He scanned the street, found me, and started over. Martha muttered, "Here comes courage after closing time." Doyle climbed the steps and stopped beneath the porch roof. His eyes were bloodshot, but he did not smell drunk tonight. That worried me more. "You heard the horses?" he asked. Yes. Could have been cattle hands. Could have. He glared at me. Don't talk to me like I'm a fool. I studied him. Then don't ask questions you already know the answer to. His jaw worked, but he swallowed whatever anger rose in him. If Luke Grayson is coming here because of you, I need to know. You need to know? I'm still sheriff. Martha gave a bitter little laugh. Doyle flinched as if she had slapped him. I looked at his shotgun, then at his face. Are you? That one hurt him. I saw it land behind his eyes. He lowered his voice. You think I don't know what this town thinks of me? You think I don't know what I became? I said nothing. Doyle looked toward the dark street. I stood up to Silas Tucker once. 3 years ago. Had a deputy then. Young man named Henry Bell. Martha went still. I glanced at her. The name meant something. More than something. Doyle's voice roughened. Henry tried to arrest one of Tucker's riders for shooting a farmer over a fence dispute. Next morning, Henry was found hanging from the cottonwood east of town. Martha's face had gone hard and pale. My husband, she said quietly. The wind moved between us. I understood then. Not all of it, but enough. Doyle looked at her with shame so old it had grown roots. After that, folks stopped asking me to be brave. No, Martha said. You stopped answering. The sheriff lowered his eyes. I had seen men broken before. Some broke loud, with screaming and fists and whiskey bottles smashed against walls. Others broke quietly and kept walking around after, wearing a badge or a uniform, hoping nobody noticed the cracked places. Doyle was the second kind. He turned back to me. If Grayson comes in, he'll make a show of it. That's how he works. He'll push until somebody reaches for a gun. Then he'll kill them clean and call it fair. And Tucker? Silas Tucker will let it happen if it helps him. Or pay for it if it suits him. Why would Grayson be asking about me? Doyle's gaze sharpened. I was hoping you'd tell me. I breathed slowly. Luke Grayson did not know me. At least, not by the name I no longer used. But Walter had spoken too loudly in the saloon. The ghost of Brimstone Ridge. A dead legend. A soldier who should have stayed buried. Men like Grayson hunted reputations the way wolves hunted weak cattle. If he heard even a whisper that someone faster, older, bloodier, or more feared might still be breathing, he would come. Not because of justice. Because ego is a hunger that never fills. I'll leave before morning, I said. Martha turned quickly. You can't. That's the safest thing for everyone. For you, maybe. No. For the town. Doyle shook his head. Too late. I looked at him. He pointed down the street. Near the water trough, nailed to the post outside the general store, was a strip of white cloth moving in the wind. I walked down the steps and crossed the street. The cloth had been pinned with a knife. A playing card was stuck beneath the blade. The ace of spades. On the cloth, written in dark ink, were 6 words. Tell the nameless man to stay. Martha read it over my shoulder and went silent. Sheriff Doyle spat into the dirt. Grayson. I pulled the knife free and took the card. It was new, clean, untouched by rain or dust. A calling card. A promise. A child could have understood it. The next morning, Red Hollow woke under a hard blue sky. Sunlight made everything look sharper and uglier. The mud dried into brown scars. Flies gathered near the horse trough. The town pretended to continue with ordinary life, but every movement carried dread. Men lifted sacks slower. Women kept children indoors. Even the dogs seemed to bark less. I spent most of the morning helping Elias Turner mend the last of the church fence. He did not mention the card. He did not need to. At noon, he handed me a canteen and said, "You leaving?" I plan to. Plans change. They shouldn't. He leaned on the fence rail. War taught me something. I drank from the canteen. Only one thing? That running from a battle don't always save anybody. I capped the canteen and handed it back. This isn't my battle. Elias looked toward town. That's what every decent man says right before he realizes it is. Before I could answer, a scream split the air. We both turned. It came from the direction of the livery. I was moving before I decided to move. Old instincts took over. Boots hit dirt. Breath shortened. Eyes measured windows, rooftops, doorways. The world narrowed into angles and threats. By the time I reached the livery, a crowd had gathered but kept its distance. Cole Vale stood in the street with 3 men around him. The stable hand, the nervous man who had taken Gideon, was on his knees in the dust. Blood ran from his nose onto his shirt. One of Cole's men held him by the hair. Gideon stood nearby, saddled and trembling, with a fresh cut along his flank. That made something cold inside me go still. Cole saw me and smiled through bruised lips. "Well, there he is," he called. "Nobody himself." I stopped 10 paces away. "What did the horse do?" Cole laughed. "Horse? I'm talking to you, old man. What did the horse do?" My voice had dropped. The crowd felt it. Cole's smile faltered for half a breath, then returned. "Maybe I don't like animals belonging to men who embarrass me." The stable hand coughed blood. I tried to stop them. I looked at him. "You did fine." Cole drew his revolver halfway from its holster, then pushed it back down slowly. He wanted me to see it. Wanted me to think about it. "Mr. Tucker wants a word." "I don't want one." "He don't care what you want." I noticed men like him rarely do. Cole stepped closer. "You got 2 choices. Walk to Tucker's office nice and polite, or I drag you there bleeding." The whole street waited. Sheriff Doyle stood outside his office with the shotgun in his hands. He did not move. Martha stood on the saloon porch, one hand pressed against her mouth. Walter watched from a window. Elias had followed me and now stood near the church gate. Everybody waited to see which kind of man I would become. That was the cruelty of it. I had spent years trying not to be watched. Trying not to be needed. Trying not to be remembered. But violence has a way of putting a lantern over your head and inviting the world to stare. I looked at Cole. Then at Gideon's bleeding side. Then at the stable hand kneeling in the dust. "Let him go," I said. Cole grinned. "You said that last night." "Yes. Worked better then." His man laughed and yanked the stable hand's head back. I moved. Not fast like a duel. Fast like war. My left hand caught Cole's gun wrist before his revolver cleared leather. My right fist struck his throat just hard enough to fold him backward without killing him. I turned with his falling weight and drove my boot into the knee of the man holding the stable hand. The knee bent wrong. He screamed and dropped. The third man reached for his gun. That was when Sheriff Doyle finally raised his shotgun. "Don't," he roared. The third man froze. But the fourth did not. He was behind me, near the livery door. I saw the movement in the reflection of the water trough more than with my eyes. His revolver came up. I drew. One shot. The sound cracked through Red Hollow like judgment. The man's gun flew from his hand before he could fire. He stumbled backward, clutching a ruined palm, screaming. I held my revolver steady. Smoke curled from the barrel. No one breathed. Cole lay in the dust, coughing and clawing at his throat. His men groaned around him. The stable hand crawled away, shaking. I had not killed anyone. But every soul in Red Hollow now understood that I could have. And maybe that was worse. Sheriff Doyle stared at me over the barrel of his shotgun. Martha looked like she had seen a ghost. Elias removed his hat slowly. Then Walter Green's voice came from the saloon doorway, trembling but clear. "Lord help us," he whispered. "It really is him." Cole looked up from the dirt, eyes wide with pain and fear. For the first time since I rode into Red Hollow, he was not smiling. I holstered my revolver. "Tell Tucker," I said, "if he wants a word, he can come get it himself." Cole tried to speak but only coughed. That was when another voice answered from the far end of town. Smooth. Calm. Amused. "Now that," the voice said, "is a mighty dangerous invitation." Every head turned. A rider sat at the edge of the main street on a black horse. He wore a black coat despite the heat, a clean white shirt, and a silver-trimmed gun belt with 2 polished revolvers resting low on his hips. His face was lean, handsome in the cruel way knives can be handsome. He smiled as if the whole town had been built for his entertainment. 4 riders sat behind him. I knew who he was before anyone said the name. Luke Grayson. The fastest gun in the West. He touched the brim of his hat and looked straight at me. "I rode 3 days to meet a dead man," he said. "Tell me I didn't come all this way for nothing." The street fell silent. And for the first time in years, I felt the past step out of its grave and stand beside me. Nobody moved. Not me. Not Grayson. Not the men standing frozen in the middle of Red Hollow with fear crawling through their bones. The wind rolled dust between us while Luke Grayson sat tall in his saddle, calm as a man arriving for supper instead of bloodshed. Sunlight reflected off the silver engraving on his revolvers, making them flash like mirrors every time his horse shifted. He smiled at me as though we were old friends. I hated men who smiled before violence. They usually enjoyed it too much. "Well?" Grayson called from across the street. "You gonna tell me your name, or should I keep guessing?" Cole Vale was still kneeling in the dirt, coughing and clutching his throat. None of his men dared move now. The entire town had forgotten them the moment Grayson appeared. That was power. Real power. Not fear alone, but attention. The ability to pull every eye toward you without lifting a finger. I kept my hand away from my revolver. "My name doesn't matter." Grayson chuckled softly. "Funny thing about legends. Folks always try burying the names first." The crowd stirred nervously. Sheriff Doyle stood rigid outside his office with the shotgun held across his chest. I could tell he was praying nobody reached for steel. Martha stood on the saloon porch, eyes fixed on me. Waiting. Everybody was waiting. Grayson swung down from his horse with slow confidence. He landed lightly in the dust and brushed imaginary dirt from his sleeves before beginning to walk toward me. Every step deliberate. Every movement measured. He wanted the town to feel him coming. "I heard stories," he said. "Old war stories. Men whispering about Brimstone Ridge. About a cavalry officer who walked through cannon fire like the devil forgot to claim him." I said nothing. Grayson stopped about 15 feet away. Close enough for killing. Close enough to see his eyes clearly. They were pale gray. Cold eyes. Not angry. Not wild. Just empty in the places where decent men keep mercy. "You know what interested me most," he continued. "Wasn't the stories about how many men he killed." The wind tugged at his coat. It was the stories about how fast he was. Silence spread through the street. Nobody even pretended to breathe now. Grayson smiled again. "Tell me something, old man. Are the stories true?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. "Some of them." A few people in the crowd gasped softly. The stable hand stared at me like he no longer knew whether to thank me or fear me. Grayson's grin widened. "There it is. Knew I didn't ride all this way for nothing." Cole finally forced himself upright behind him. "Luke?" Grayson silenced him with a small glance. Not a word. Just a glance. Cole shut his mouth immediately. That told me more about Luke Grayson than the revolvers did. Men like Cole only feared bigger predators. Grayson never looked away from me. "I've been chasing your ghost for years. You should have found another hobby." I tried. He shrugged lightly. Didn't stick. The crowd laughed nervously, unsure whether they were allowed to. Grayson slowly turned in a circle, addressing the whole town now. Do you people understand who's standing in front of you? Nobody answered. War hero, he continued. Officer. Killer. Survivor of Brimstone Ridge. He looked back at me. You know they used to call you the Iron Captain? I felt my jaw tighten. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in over 10 years. Martha noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied me. Grayson saw it too. Oh, he said softly. That one still hurts. I took one slow breath. Why are you here? That made his smile fade a little. Because legends shouldn't rot quietly. That all? No, his pale eyes sharpened. I want to know if I'm faster. There it was. The truth. Not money. Not Tucker. Not revenge. Ego. Pure and simple. A man who had spent so long hearing he was the fastest alive that he could no longer tolerate the possibility someone else once had been. I had seen men like him before the war. And during it. Usually young officers with clean uniforms and romantic ideas about glory. The battlefield either buried them or cured them. Apparently Grayson had avoided both. Sheriff Doyle stepped forward carefully. Luke, nobody needs to die today. Grayson glanced toward him without interest. Then tell your people not to reach for guns. You heard me, Doyle said more firmly. Grayson's riders laughed behind him. One of them spat into the dirt. I saw Doyle's fingers tighten on the shotgun. He was scared. But he was trying. That mattered. Grayson looked back at me. You know what the funny thing is? Half the stories about you don't even agree on your name. That's because names stop mattering in war. For the first time, Grayson's expression changed slightly. Curiosity. That was dangerous too. What happened to you at Brimstone Ridge? He asked. The street disappeared for a moment. Not physically. Mentally. That is how memory works when trauma digs deep enough. Suddenly I could smell smoke again. Gunpowder. Wet blood. Burning leather. I heard horses screaming. Men crying for medics who were already dead. The battlefield returned in flashes behind my eyes. Brimstone Ridge. Winter. Snow blackened by cannon ash. Colonel Barrett shouting orders while Confederate artillery tore the hill apart piece by piece. And me. Younger. Faster. Still believing survival meant something noble. Captain, a soldier screamed through the smoke. We're surrounded. I remembered turning. Remembered seeing boys barely old enough to shave trying not to panic while shells exploded around us. Remembered Barrett grabbing my coat. You get them off this ridge, he shouted. You hear me? Get them out. Then the cannon blast came. The memory hit so hard my chest tightened. The colonel vanished in fire. 1 second alive. Next second gone. Martha's voice pulled me back. Hey. I blinked. Red Hollow returned around me. Dust instead of snow. Silence instead of cannon fire. But the weight inside my chest remained. Grayson watched me carefully now. There he is, he murmured. Been wondering where you went. I went nowhere. You disappeared. No, I looked him dead in the eyes. I survived. That answer seemed to interest him more than anything else I had said. He stepped closer. Too close. You know why I became fast? He asked quietly. I did not answer. Because men worship speed. They don't care if you're honest. Or decent. Or loyal. None of that matters. His smile returned faintly. But speed? Speed becomes legend. You mistake fear for respect. No, he said softly. I just understand people better than you. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he even had reason to. Because Red Hollow certainly feared him more than they respected anyone else alive. Grayson glanced toward the saloon porch where Martha stood. "Pretty woman," he said casually. "Would be a shame if this town got caught between us." That did it. Not visibly. I did not reach for my gun. Did not move. But something old and ugly shifted awake inside me. The same thing that had kept me alive at Brimstone Ridge. The same thing I had spent years burying beneath silence and dust and whiskey and lonely roads. Grayson saw it instantly. And smiled wider. "There you are." Sheriff Doyle stepped forward again. "Luke?" "Careful, Sheriff," Grayson interrupted calmly. "This is the most alive this man's looked in years." The town felt it too. The tension changed. This was no longer about Tucker or Coal Vale or even Red Hollow itself. This had become something older. Two men standing in the street with entirely different relationships to violence. One man loved it. The other feared what it turned him into. Grayson slowly removed his gloves finger by finger. "I'll make it simple," he said. "Tomorrow. Noon. Main Street." Martha immediately shook her head. "No." Grayson ignored her. "You and me," he continued. "One draw. One winner. And if I refuse?" He smiled without warmth. "I stay in town." The meaning landed heavily across every face around us. Sheriff Doyle cursed under his breath. Martha looked furious now. "You'd murder innocent people just to force a duel?" Grayson tilted his head slightly. "No, ma'am. Fear and panic would murder them. I'd simply be nearby when it happened. Monster. Plain and simple. Not a wild one. The worst kind. A calm one." I looked past him toward the open plains beyond Red Hollow. For years I had avoided exactly this moment. Another duel. Another reputation. Another chance to become the man war created. And now the choice stood in front of me wearing silver revolvers and a pleasant smile. Elias Turner's voice came quietly from behind the crowd. "Sometimes battles find us whether we want them or not." I closed my eyes briefly. Just briefly. Then opened them again. "Tomorrow," I said. The town seemed to stop breathing altogether. Grayson grinned. "Good." He extended his hand almost politely. I did not take it. That amused him even more. "I'll be staying nearby," he said. "Wouldn't want my opponent sneaking out of town. I'm too old for sneaking." "Maybe." His pale eyes glimmered. "But I don't think you're too old for killing." With that, he turned and walked back toward his horse. No rush. No fear. Absolute confidence. His riders followed behind him while townsfolk moved aside instantly, like prey parting for wolves. Before mounting up, Grayson looked back one final time. "Oh," he said casually. "One more thing." I waited. "The stories say you never missed." He smiled. "I hope that part's true." Then he rode out of town. Silence lingered long after the hoofbeats faded. Nobody moved for several seconds. Finally Sheriff Doyle lowered his shotgun slowly. "You shouldn't have accepted." "I know." Martha stepped down from the porch and stood directly in front of me. "You could still leave." "No." "Why?" I looked at the ace of spades still tucked into my coat pocket. Then at the terrified faces surrounding us. Then at the dusty street where tomorrow blood would likely spill. "Because if I run," I said quietly, "he turns this town into a graveyard." Martha's eyes searched mine. "And if you stay?" I looked toward the horizon where Grayson had disappeared. The old coldness inside me had fully awakened now. Steady. Familiar. Terrible. "Then maybe," I said, "he finally meets someone war failed to kill." I did not sleep that night. Men like Luke Grayson probably slept just fine before duels. Men who enjoyed killing usually did. They carried death lightly, like gamblers carrying lucky cards. But men who remembered every face never truly rested again. I sat alone behind the red lantern sometime past midnight, cleaning my revolver beneath the weak glow of an oil lamp. The metal looked old but steady in my hands. A Colt Army revolver worn smooth from years of use, war, dust, rain, and blood. My hands moved automatically. Open cylinder. Check rounds. Spin. Close. Repeat. Across the alley, the wind rattled loose shutters against the buildings. Somewhere farther away, a dog barked once and then fell silent. Martha stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You ever sleep?" she asked quietly. "Used to." She handed me a cup and sat beside me on the wooden crate near the wall. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt strangely peaceful compared to the storm waiting for morning. Finally she asked, "How many men have you killed?" I stared into the black coffee. "Too many." "That's not a number." "No," I said. "It's a weight." She looked down at her hands. Henry used to say something similar. Her husband. Sheriff Doyle had carried guilt over that death for years, but Martha carried something worse. Memory. The kind that wakes beside you every morning. "I didn't want this," I admitted quietly. "I know. But wanting doesn't matter much." "No," she agreed softly. "It doesn't." The wind moved through the alley again. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding since Red Hollow first whispered my ghost back to life. "What's your real name?" I sat there for several seconds before answering. "Samuel." She looked at me carefully. "Just Samuel?" I almost smiled. "No. But the rest belongs to a dead man." Martha nodded slowly, as if she understood more than I expected. "Then maybe tomorrow isn't about killing Luke Grayson," she said. "Maybe it's about deciding whether that dead man stays buried." That stayed with me after she went back inside. Because deep down, I knew she was right. The duel was not the real danger. The real danger was what surviving it might awaken permanently. Morning came hard and bright over Red Hollow. The entire town felt different before sunrise. Tense. Still. Waiting. People gathered early along the sidewalks. Storefronts stayed closed. Curtains shifted constantly behind windows. Men stood in clusters whispering while pretending not to stare at me when I crossed the street. Sheriff Doyle tried keeping order, but fear already owned the town. I stopped at the church before noon. Not because I was religious. War had complicated that part of me years ago. But churches are quiet places, and quiet matters before violence. Inside, sunlight spilled through dusty windows onto empty pews. Elias Turner sat near the front with his hat resting in his lap. He glanced over as I entered. "Knew you'd come." "I didn't." "Sure you did." I sat beside him. The church smelled like old wood and candle wax. Elias leaned back slowly. "You scared?" "Yes." That surprised him. "Thought men like you stopped fearing things." "No," I stared ahead at the empty altar. "We just learned fear keeps us alive." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "when my boy died at Brimstone Ridge, I spent years hating the officers who survived." I said nothing. Thought maybe they should have died too. He sighed heavily. "Then one day I realized survival ain't theft. Sometimes it's punishment." Those words landed deeper than he knew. Because he was right. The living carry things graves never do. Elias stood carefully, joints cracking with age. "Whatever happens out there today, don't let that boy with silver guns tell you who you are." Then he walked away, leaving me alone with the silence. At noon, Red Hollow gathered around death. The main street looked almost peaceful beneath the blazing sun. Dust drifted slowly through the heat while shadows stretched beneath buildings like dark water. Luke Grayson stood at the far end of the street already waiting. Black coat. Silver revolvers. Calm smile. His riders stood near the saloon watching eagerly. Cole Vale looked especially excited now that his throat bruises had darkened purple. Martha stood near Walter beneath the porch roof. Sheriff Doyle remained close to the center of town, shotgun in hand, though everybody knew it would not matter once the draw started. I walked into the street slowly. Every boot step sounded loud in the silence. Grayson watched me approach with open amusement. "There he is," he called. "Ghost of Brimstone Ridge." I stopped 20 feet away. "That name belongs to the past. Past still shoots, don't it?" The crowd shifted nervously. Grayson rolled his shoulders casually. "You nervous, Samuel?" Hearing my name spoken aloud felt strange. Personal. Dangerous. "You talk too much," I replied. He laughed softly. "That's because I already know how this ends." "No," I said. "You only think you do." That sharpened his eyes slightly. "Good. Confidence makes men careless." Grayson slowly removed his hat and tossed it aside. "You know what I think," he said. "I think you've spent years pretending you hate violence while secretly missing it." The heat pressed down harder across the town. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "I think," Grayson continued, "the second you draw that gun today, you'll remember exactly who you really are." He wanted anger. Wanted emotion. Wanted me unstable. Classic tactic. But war teaches patience better than peace ever can. I stood quietly, hand near my revolver. "You done talking?" His smile widened. "Almost." He slowly turned toward the watching crowd. "People of Red Hollow," he announced loudly, "today you get to witness history." His voice carried through the entire street. "One of us walks away the fastest gun alive." Then he looked directly back at me. "And the other finally stays buried." The wind shifted. Dust rolled between us. Everything became very still. I noticed details then. The twitch in Grayson's trigger finger. The sweat moving down Cole Vale's neck. The nervous creak of Sheriff Doyle's shotgun grip. Martha clutching the porch railings so tightly her knuckles had gone white. And behind Grayson. Movement. Tiny. Almost invisible. One of Grayson's riders near the saloon was reaching for a hidden rifle beneath the porch. My stomach went cold. It had never been a fair duel. Of course it hadn't. Grayson noticed my eyes shift briefly. And smiled. That was confirmation enough. He intended to kill me one way or another. But worse. If the rifle started firing into the crowd after the draw, innocent people would die. Martha. Walter. Doyle. Children watching from windows. My mind calculated distances instantly. Old battlefield instincts awakening completely now. 2 threats. Different angles. Very little time. Grayson's hand twitched near his revolver. "Draw," he whispered. The street exploded. His revolver cleared leather fast. Unbelievably fast. Faster than any man I had seen since the war. But speed alone is not enough. Not against someone who stopped measuring time normally years ago. I drew. The world slowed. Not literally. That is just how combat feels when survival sharpens every nerve into a blade. I fired once at Grayson. Once toward the porch. 2 shots. 2 impacts. Grayson staggered backward, revolver flying from his hand before he could fire cleanly. My second shot shattered the hidden rifle beneath the porch before the rider could aim into the crowd. Chaos erupted instantly. People screamed. Horses panicked. Sheriff Doyle roared and leveled the shotgun at Grayson's remaining riders. "Don't move." Cole Vale reached for his revolver in panic. A third shot from me struck the dirt directly between his boots. He froze solid. Dust drifted upward around him. Grayson dropped to one knee clutching his shoulder, blood spreading across his black coat. His revolver lay several feet away in the dirt. The fastest gun in the West looked stunned. Not by pain. By defeat. I kept my revolver trained on him. The whole town stared in silence. Grayson looked up slowly, breathing hard. He coughed sharply. You could have killed me. Yes. That frightened him more than the wound. Because suddenly he understood the truth. Everything they whispered about Brimstone Ridge. Everything buried beneath years of silence. Had been real. I stepped closer carefully. You wanted to know if you were faster. Blood dripped from his fingers. I lowered my revolver slightly. You are. Confusion crossed his face. But speed ain't the same thing as surviving. His pale eyes searched mine, trying to understand. Then realization came slowly. I had seen the rifleman before the duel fully began. Seen the trap. Adjusted. Adapted. War had taught me something no gunslinger reputation ever could. Real combat is not about pride. It is about staying alive long enough to protect whoever stands behind you. Grayson laughed suddenly. Weakly. Bitterly. Whole country feared you for a reason. I holstered my revolver. Maybe. Sheriff Doyle moved in quickly, disarming the remaining riders while townsfolk finally found courage now that the danger had broken. Coal Vale surrendered without a fight. Funny how bullies shrink once legends fall. Martha crossed the street toward me slowly. You're bleeding. I looked down. A bullet had grazed my side during the draw. I had not even noticed. Looks worse than it is. Her eyes filled with emotions too complicated to name. Relief. Fear. Admiration. Sadness. Maybe all of them together. Behind us, Luke Grayson sat in the dust staring at the ground where his revolver had fallen. Not dead. Just defeated. And somehow that seemed harder for him to accept. The town slowly began breathing again. Walter started crying openly near the saloon. Sheriff Doyle looked 10 years younger somehow. Elias Turner stood near the church with his hat over his heart. I looked around Red Hollow one final time. The streets. The buildings. The frightened people finally standing taller. Then I glanced toward the open plains beyond town. The road waiting for me. Martha followed my eyes immediately. You're leaving. It was not a question. Yes. You could stay. I almost wished she had not said that. Because part of me wanted to. That was the dangerous part. A man like me does not belong in peaceful places for long. Eventually violence catches up. Or memory does. I adjusted my old cavalry coat slowly. The dead man should keep moving, I said quietly. Martha stepped closer. Samuel. Hearing my name spoken gently hurt more than any bullet ever had. I nodded once. Then I turned and walked toward the livery where Gideon waited saddled beneath the afternoon sun. Behind me, Red Hollow remained silent. Watching. Remembering. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across the plains as the nameless veteran rode away once more, leaving only whispers behind him. You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan.